Hello, and welcome to the Social Psychic Radio Show featuring Jason Zook. In uncertain times, we must change our focus and priorities. This show will highlight social justice issues with the goal of expanding minds and increasing unity, love, and mutual respect for ourselves and our planet. We support the Black Lives Matter movement. Our show aspires to promote social spirituality, which simply means that by coming together, we can solve any of our problems, including the goal of bringing an end to all forms of hate, discrimination, bias, or oppression. We must protect our environment, reform our criminal justice system, and protect every citizen from police brutality. When we come together, it becomes possible to bridge the gaps that plague our society and divide us from within. We the people means everyone.
Hello and welcome to the Social Psychic Radio Show. It's a great pleasure I welcome Chris Riedel to the show today to discuss his new book, Blood Money. And what I'm really excited about having Chris on the show is this is the first time I've had someone who's a whistleblower, a real life David against the Goliath of the medical lab industry, as we'll call it. Most of you probably have heard of the labs that we're talking about. We're going to get into Blood Brothers, the book. We're going to talk about how this impacts each and one of our every lives and the degree of what the scope and the magnitude. It can baffle one's mind to see that there is this type of mass fraud that occurs on a regular basis. And so I'm really concerned about that. I wanted to bring that to light in our show today. And I am so happy to have Chris to come on the show. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jason. It's nice to be here.
I appreciate it. I want to ask you, when you started your journey, did you ever anticipate that you'd wind up taking on medical lab fraud firsthand?
Well, I've founded 5 healthcare companies in the Silicon Valley area. And no, I never anticipated I would become a fraud fighter. And when I founded my 4th company, we quickly realized that the industry had changed and that these 2 predatory giants, referred to by Wall Street as the Blood Brothers, were forcing all small labs out of business or buying them on the cheap. And the reason I became a fraud fighter is, in order for me to continue to grow my business, I either had to knowingly commit federal and state frauds, or close my business, lay off 150 employees, and wipe out most of our net worth, or try to stop frauds and stand up for taxpayers. I wanted to level the playing field for all labs and try to have taxpayers stop being ripped off.
Who are the Blood Brothers? Can you identify them for our audience?
Yes, they're the 2 largest labs in the world, Quest Diagnostics and Laboratory Corporation of America. And I'm sure all of your listeners have had testing done by them at some point in time.
How did you first learn about that there was something improper going on with the Blood Brothers and the way that they were handling themselves?
One of my sales reps came to me after a couple of years and said, Chris, look at these prices that Quest is offering these doctors. Doctors hate the service levels of Quest and LabCorp. They want to do business with us, the local lab, but they also want us to match for a limited amount of the billing that goes to the doctor these prices. And when I looked at it, many of the prices were below cost. And the model for the Blood Brothers is based on fraud. We are going to hook doctors with loss leader pricing in order to pull through the highly profitable Medicare, Medicaid, and insurance businesses. But in order to get that business, they were willing to lose money on the small amount of business billed to doctors. So I decided I better contact our regulatory counsel and see if I considered doing the same thing, would it violate any statutes? And my regulatory counsel said, oh, absolutely. First of all, You have to pass on the lowest charge of any payer to the Medicaid program. And we didn't think they were doing that. And then secondly, it's a clear kickback. You're offering loss leader pricing for the purpose of pulling through Medicare business. So it was a clear violation of both federal and state laws.
So you had the aha moment, a huge aha moment, and you're thinking to yourself, wow, what did you do next? What was your next step?
I called my longtime personal attorney and consigliere, John Michelson, and said, John, what am I going to do here? And he said, well, let me think about it. And then he called me back about 2 months later and said, come on in, I think I have a solution. And he explained to me how the whistleblower statute worked. The whistleblower statute created during Lincoln to stop fraud on the Army, creates a public-private partnership where individuals can sue on behalf of the government and then work in conjunction with the departments of justice to try and stop the frauds. As a consequence of that, the government is getting an insider who can help explain to them what's really going on. And secondly, the whistleblower is rewarded if it's successful with a portion of the proceeds recovered by the fraudsters. And it looked like the only way to go, frankly. We knew we had the facts. We knew we had the law. So I said, let's do it. I had no idea at the time that a whistleblower's life will never be the same. When the fraudsters find out, these big companies find out who has filed this lawsuit, and they do everything they can to destroy them. I mean, destroy them. Many of them end up unemployable, bankrupt, and divorced. It's really sad. I met one whistleblower who ended up with a very successful settlement, who was living under a bridge when the settlement came. It's really awful.
When you think about corporate greed, and when you think about corruption, and you think about imbalancing of the system to make it so that if someone tries to speak out with truth, that they get destroyed and they're sleeping under a bridge until the final settlement comes in, that sounds like we really need to reform the system so that
the problem is I mean, a decade ago, the FBI estimated that $234 billion was stolen each year in healthcare. That's a quarter of the total budget. And last year, the FBI proudly announced it had collected $2.2 billion in settlements from whistleblower lawsuits. That's less than 1%.
Yeah, it's a fraction.
And the reason is they're not motivated at DOJ to stop fraud and put fraudsters in jail. What they like to do is negotiate, quote, affordable civil settlements. So they'll accept 20 to 30 cents on the dollar and sign a settlement agreement without ever going to trial.
But then who benefits from that? The people who committed the fraud, because they're going to pay a slight penny to the profits they make illegally.
The risk reward analysis is so simple. Okay, in the unlikely event I do get caught, I'll pay 20 or 30 cents.
Slap on the wrist.
I'm not going to get fired. I'm not going to lose my bonus, and I'm not going to go to jail. And until DOJ changes their attitude and makes it clear that fraud doesn't pay, it's not going to stop. Now, if you could help me do that, we'd do a real service for this country.
Well, it doesn't take a lot for us to look at the situation and hear you explain it, and looking at it from an impartial outside point of view. I'm not emotionally involved in this at all. I'm just thinking about it as we're talking about it today. And I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't add up and make sense on any level. I think anyone listening to this from our audience, they're going to look at it critically as well and say, wait a minute. So we have a government, Department of Justice, DOJ, federal DOJ, that does not actively enforce the fraud statutes, and the statutes themselves sound like they don't really give a lot of teeth, and it's more of a paper tiger kind of approach. Even if you have this mechanism where you can sue on behalf of the federal government or state governmental entity and share in the recovery, and it's a partnership, it still doesn't It doesn't properly police the situation.
One of the problems, Jason, is that the Department of Justice hates the whistleblower statute. They just don't, they're very insular. They have their own way of doing things. And it's rare when they'll actually form a partnership with us. In California, the assistant attorney generals we work with did. We shared everything. We did a lot of the discovery work. We prepared the motions, they signed them, and we had a great outcome. And in a couple of other cases, they worked with us and we had good outcomes. But most of the time they say, okay, thank you very much, go away. And then 3 or 4 years later, they'll call us up and they'll say, well, you know, we don't really like this thing. We're not going to intervene, or we've already negotiated a cheap settlement. And when they don't partner, they go nowhere.
But doesn't that, it's an incentive to commit fraud to the other entities. If you're a multi-billion-dollar company.
That's right.
It's like getting an infraction is not even a speeding ticket to them. They're not even having to worry about it. It's like.
Quest Diagnostics has entered into 10 separate fraud settlements and 1 criminal conviction. No one's been fired.
Well, I mean, that's a serial practice right there.
That's right.
Right?
And, and the same thing with Merck, you know, this huge drug company. I was at a Taxpayers Against Fraud conference, and someone from the Department of Justice made the comment that is an organized crime company masquerading as a pharmaceutical company. And they've had many, many, many settlements and consent decrees. You know, we won't do it again. I think consent decrees are not worth the paper they're written on.
At what point do you claim ignorance to the extent of stupidity?
They don't care.
Right? When you have
they don't care. They have their way of doing things and they don't care. I mean, think about it. If you're the Department of Justice and you have this whistleblower and great attorneys who offer to do all the work, why wouldn't you take them up on it?
Hesitancy, it's concerning to me. Like, the government, they've got all the resources allocated to pursue and prosecute fraud.
Yes, they do. But
it got you privately saying, I'm here to help. I'm right here. I'm here to help. Let me take it over and you can partner with me. And we've got the resources and we know what we're doing. And then what do?
They tell us, go away. And then complain about how overworked they are. I mean, we give them all the evidence and it still takes them generally 3 years to get back to us.
And they say bureaucracy needs to be streamlined, right? When it comes to this stuff, it needs to be done over. It needs to be restarted.
They don't have the will to do their job.
What's been your interaction with like representatives, elected officials? I'm sure has to be people who have been impacted by this, with constituents that have a passionate position.
Well, the real hero of the whistleblower statutes today is Senator Charles Grassley from Iowa, and he's fantastic.
Okay.
I wish that somebody in Congress would hold a hearing having me in one chair and some high official in charge of whistleblowing from DOJ in the other chair. That would be a great hearing, and it might stimulate DOJ to wake up and change the way they do business.
How do you do that?
I don't know.
I guess for starters, we probably want constituents to reach out to their elected representatives and contact them and tell them, yeah, I know there's 5 billion issues going on in the world today, but this is one that we got to pay attention to.
You're talking about billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars a year. That's a lot of money.
It's ridiculous. There's no way to simplify the logic behind it. That the government doesn't want to. They don't have the time. So you got to make it.
That's what they say. And you know, we're actually now delighted when they come back and they say, we have decided we are not going to intervene and prosecute this case, because the statute then allows us to do it.
So talk about a little about that for a minute. So basically you could bring it to them and you can say, hey, I unearthed this massive.
Here's all the evidence you need. You know, if you want to go get some more, go ahead. You got the people to do it, or we'll do it for you, working with you. And here's an excellent case. The Department of Justice went after 5 companies that were all doing the same thing. They were in these cardiovascular space. They had these big panels of tests to help identify the risk of cardiovascular disease. But they would bribe the doctors to order them, and they'd pay them money every time they did, and they would never bill patients. So there wasn't any governor on the practice by the doctor of, is this really necessary? And it violates all sorts of statutes. And
rules too, I'm sure. I mean, they have rules they have to be governed by when they do their practice as doctors, just like us as lawyers.
Well, the doctors, they are liable to ensure that every test they order is based on what that patient needs, not this routine panel for everybody. But there was no liability, they thought, because patients weren't going to get a bill. And so they took one lab, all the others labs went broke, and they took the biggest one to trial and won a $119 million verdict. And at the trial, they had 17 lawyers there, as many as Enron.
What do you do with 17 lawyers? I mean, that's like a lawyer joke, right? How many lawyers does it take to defend the indefendable?
The way they operate.
That which can't be defended.
But shortly thereafter, there was another company I had filed a whistleblower lawsuit against that was still under seal, who did exactly the same things, exactly. And they said, we're not going to intervene here. And I go, why not? We can't tell you.
Unbelievable. I mean,
so we started the real discovery. And within, I think, 2 months, the company went to DOJ behind our backs and said, we're not really doing financially well, even though they were owned by a huge European company. They had lots of money. This division itself wasn't doing well. Behind our backs, DOJ cut a really cheap deal. Didn't even tell us about it.
And I bet you it's silent, so it's not going to be in the press, right? It's something that's confidential. That's not going to be exposed. That they make.
Well, no, they did. They published their settlements, but I can't publicly take on the Department of Justice. In fact, I had to rewrite my book, and the reason is I gave it to my lawyer to review, and he says, "Chris, if you publish this book, DOJ is going to dismiss every one of our outstanding lawsuits. You need to rewrite it." So I did, taking out my editorial comments and letting readers come to their own conclusions about the Department of Justice.
It doesn't take much to form a conclusion from our conversation. And from my opinion, it's not very comforting to think that we have who should be our enforcement mechanism when you don't have people enforcing, like the fox in the hen house, right? If you don't enforce it, you're going to be in chaos.
Now, there are some good assistant attorney generals. There are some, but we haven't run into very many, and we've run into too many of the others.
What do you do with a system like that when you see the flaws of the system and you're looking at it and you see the need to bring this kind of an issue to the government and bring it to their attention? Because keep in mind, every single thing we see on TV is all about, we're spending too much money, we need to bring money back into the government, we have all these trillions of dollars in the deficit, we need to do this, infrastructure. If you think about the amount of money that you're talking about, I think you recovered to date $553 million as a result of your efforts. That $553 million would go a long way in government resources if they did their jobs as DOJ, and if there wasn't this widespread corruption that they looked the other way to and then slapped them on the wrist with a little consent negotiated plea.
Jason, I have a chapter in the book on 9 suggestions for DOJ that if they implemented even some of them, it would be like fighting fraud with tanks instead of water.
Well, can you highlight a few of those for our audience? Because I'd be curious to find out what your suggestions are based on your. Sure. We're going to get into the book too. I want to get into the details of the book because I think what you're sharing with my audience is such a significant message of alignment that I'm in alignment with, that I really do want to get this episode out there so that our audience can hear what you have to say, because that's how important and critical I think this is.
Well, thank you. One of the simple ones is, if a company is going to sign one of these cheap settlement agreements, or enter into a consent decree, or lose a trial, the government claws back all payments to the board of directors and senior management for the period of the fraud. That would then incentivize the board of directors to hire their own regulatory council to report directly to the board. Are they adhering to all of the laws, as opposed to the CEO who makes a ton of money because the company does well when they're committing these frauds. I mean, it's simple. Doesn't cost the government anything. Another one is, let's keep a record by U.S. Attorney's Office of how long it takes to get to intervention and settlement, how much money they bring in. And those that are in the bottom 20% get transferred to another department. If you're going to be a poor performer, there ought to be a consequence for that. You can't fire them, they're a government attorney, but you can certainly transfer them somewhere else. These are all simple things.
Common sense approaches.
Another is to incentivize the individual government attorneys by, for every dollar greater than the amount stolen that's collected. And the statute allows 3 times the amount collected, plus $10,000 a claim. They're huge. But for every dollar if they go above it, pay significant bonuses to the attorneys who were involved and split it between the actual attorneys and that office so that they can go out and hire more staff. That would incentivize them to hold out. I mean, the fact is, no company can afford to go to trial, because if you lose, you are out of business. And so get a quick trial date, and the closer you get to trial, the more that board of directors is going to authorize any payment.
I like with that one, you're taking litigation strategy and utilizing it in such a way where you could take, like when you practice law and you do civil litigation, I always have clients ask me, what are the probabilities that if we go forward with litigation, my net result's going to be X versus if we settle now? And if you're able to make it so that you could make the insurance company, I'm not sorry, insurance company, this is what I do for a living. If you could make the labs realize the risk of going to trial will be outweighed by the opportunity of settling or paying out or just not committing fraud, I feel like that's going to do a lot with self-regulation. Your suggestions, I think, call for more policing internally within themselves, greater accountability, and probably greater transparency.
Yeah, and the other, work with whistleblowers. Take all of these great lawyers who are doing the work for free for you. Let them go off and do the discovery under your direction, which was how the statute was intended by Congress.
How do we change it?
I have no idea. It's been this way for a very long time. And I think the only way is through congressional hearings. Now, having said that, my whistleblower attorney, Neil McCarthy, who is a great attorney, is a very close personal friend of Kamala Harris.
Wow.
And once she figures out the border and space, I'm hoping we'll get a meeting with her and some people from the Department of Justice. But that could be just an empty hope.
What happened in the Cayman Islands? We're going to talk about your book now and the factual stuff. I want to know what happened in the Cayman Islands, because I know it's a part of your book.
Sure. Well, once the Department of Justice sent civil subpoenas to the fraudsters, they immediately went down to the Cayman Islands. And why do people go to the Cayman Islands?
Borrow
their assets.
Hide their money, yeah.
And these are the same guys. One of them, it was told to me by 3 government lawyers, buried a shipping container filled with gold in his backyard. I mean, in addition to going down to the Cayman Islands, and the bankruptcy trustee, they went into bankruptcy, and all of them have also declared personal bankruptcy because of this $119 million judgment. And the bankruptcy trustee has spent years trying to find where they hid the money. And he's still on it.
I could literally see him with one of those metal detectors going over the GPR, going over the guy's backyard, trying to find out where this gold is hidden up. And this sounds ridiculous. It sounds like even a movie couldn't create.
Another thing they did is they took the assets they had, like their homes, not only the ones they lived in, but the ones they owned, and sold them to their parents for $5, so that they're not in their name.
Did they get paid through Venmo?
It's just
makes
the
me laugh.
bankruptcy trustee is good. He is dogged. But I wish DOJ, why aren't they going after the assets?
You mentioned in your story as well that there's a certain governor that you had to contend with when you sought to expose the medical lab fraud and wanted to find out a little more details about that.
Rick Scott.
Ah, beautiful state of Florida.
Now the chairman of the Republican Party. He was the CEO of Health Corporation of America. And believe it or not, they had a double set of books. One they reported internally to show if they billed correctly, how much their profits would be. And one that they gave Medicare. So they completely different, two sets of books. They just lied to Medicare for the money. And it was a $2 billion whistleblower lawsuit. They tried to ruin this guy's life when it came out from under seal, and they almost did. And somehow he didn't go to prison. He was the CEO.
No, here's my question. So do you think he should be the one to head up the hearing for us?
No.
Of course not.
He's certainly an expert on fraud.
He's the fox in the hen house, based on what you're saying right now.
So what he did in Florida is truly outrageous. This is an attorney general in Florida, Pam Bondi, who worked with us. I mean, we worked it as it should have been worked, in partnership. We were getting ready for trial, and LabCorp's lobbyist had been a personal attorney for Rick Scott. So they had a long-term relationship. And he went to the governor and said, Rick, I want you to write a letter ordering your Department of Health Services to say, even though this is the law requiring companies to pass on their lowest charge, it's never been, in effect, interpreted that way. It's been interpreted in a different way, which is crazy. And so the Department of Health Services had no choice but to testify like that. So then the companies immediately went and asked for a summary judgment. And the attorney general is just, I mean, he railroaded his own attorney general.
To me,
the same party.
To me, this represents that whole departure from truth thing.
Yes.
When people just start telling lies over and over and over and over again, they just think at some point people will just start believing the lies. So there's nothing to see here. This was not something that we anticipated, even though it's not following the rules and it's against the law and it's illegal. We're going to instruct you, department, to come on the record and say X, Y, Z, since I'm involved in this, and we're going to have this happen. I mean, that's what you're telling me.
He's apparently on the short list for the nomination of the presidency. And if he does, I will be out there front and center explaining who this guy is.
He doesn't even need to be a senator. They should do some type of DOJ investigation. I know it'd be called politically motivated, but if the facts speak where they are, lawyers who do the slightest infraction wind up with significant penalties, fines, shaming. Why is it politicians are different? And why is it that medical lab companies are different in terms of any corporation that commits fraud? Shouldn't they be held accountable? Shouldn't they be shamed? Shouldn't they be penalized so that they're not told?
Those are really good questions, and I don't understand the behavior of the Department of Justice.
Have you ever had any response from Rick Scott's office when he was governor, or anything since, depending these circumstances? Because I know this happened back in 2011. Is that right? Based on
no, this happened much later. This happened just a couple of years ago. And no, we've never heard from him. We heard from the Attorney General's office. They were furious. How could he do this to us?
That's Pam Bondi?
Yeah. In fact, I'll tell you a funny Pam Bondi story. Before the LabCorp lobbyists went to Rick Scott, he found some freshman representative in Florida, a young guy, less than 30. And he went to him and he said, this law makes no sense. We want you to change the law and make it retroactive such that companies don't have to pay the lowest charge. They're entitled to charge their highest charge to the Medicaid program. And so there was a hearing on it, and Pam Bondi literally, this is the Attorney General. This isn't some assistant, lowly person, hides out in the bathroom so nobody knew she was there. And then when the committee got together after the LabCorp lobbyist explained why this was a good deal, Pam came in, and they said, "Oh, Miss Monty, well, is there something you'd like to say?" "Indeed, there is." And she steps to the microphone and said, "This is outrageous. These people are ripping off Florida taxpayers for hundreds of millions of dollars. It's been shown in other states where they've had huge settlements. What you're doing is just torpedoing our lawsuit. Don't do it."
And
They tabled it. But I mean, why should people argue that the government shouldn't get the most favorable price?
well, and you're talking about these multi-billion-dollar entities with corruption, and they've not had a hit. They have a culture of not having to worry about ramifications of their actions. So you got these executives, the higher ups, basically employing these schemes where they can maximize their personal profits, their corporate scheme, cooking books, all those kind of allegations. And then you uncover it, you unearth it, and you're like, okay, who do you take this to? DOJ or a state government.
That's
Pam
all you
Bondi.
can do.
That's all you can
There's no
do.
other way to get at these guys.
So then you
now-
take it to them, and they're like the Maytag repairman, except they don't see anything that needs to be fixed.
We recently filed a huge case I can't discuss, it's under seal. But just before we filed it, I asked my attorney, where are we going to file this case where the assistant attorney generals would work with us? They came up with 3 potential districts out of 51, I think. And in one, it was in a different circuit that had a negative interpretation of the law. In another, they didn't like the judges. So we ended up, unfortunately, filing this case with an office that will not partner. You won't hear a word.
So is that basically dead at that point?
Oh, well, they'll fiddle around with it for 3 years, and they may like it because it's so huge against a big public company in healthcare. And if somebody gets excited, they'll do something. But more likely or not, after 3 or 4 years, they'll say, "We don't like it. You're free, prosecute."
Couldn't you have Medicaid look at this too, if it's Medicaid fraud or if it's some type of billing fraud?
Absolutely. That's where the state attorney generals are supposed to represent Medicaid, not the federal government.
And so if the federal government doesn't step up, have you found state governments like California, for example, or other state entities?
California was a huge success. It took 3.5 years, but we got the largest settlement in the history of whistleblowing for a state. It was $241 million against Quest.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And then $49 million against LabCorp. But I have to tell you, when they attacked us, we were literally weeks away from personal and corporate bankruptcy.
Tell me, can you share that? What?
Sure.
It's like it's kind of like you fire your shot. You go forward with the lawsuit. You're a whistleblower, and then what was the blowback? What was what did you feel as the pressure coming back from these entities against you?
These 2 Goliaths got together, which I don't think is legal, went to the Blue Shield insurance company and said, "Look, together, we probably represent 70% of your costs for laboratory services. We'll give you a 10% discount if you take Hunter Labs, my company, out of network." Yeah, pretty easy decision for Blue Shield. And once you are not in network with a major insurance company, patients have to pay more money. And
they won't use you.
And doctors aren't going to use you.
So you were blacklisted. You were basically blacklisted in your own industry.
From that point forward, we had a dagger in our heart and we were bleeding out.
How did you change that and turn it around?
Well, we got that settlement.
Okay.
We sold land.
But if you hadn't gotten the settlement, or if it got delayed an extra year beyond the 3-year mark, what would have happened?
An extra month.
An extra month.
We would have been homeless.
And so you would have been under a bridge with the other guy.
We would have been under a bridge probably, but 150 employees would have lost their jobs, and we would have lost everything we had.
It boggles my mind to hear this, that we're in 2021 and it's clearly identified fraud, identifiable, it's against the law, and yet all the key players that should enforce the system turn the other way and whistle like nothing to see here.
And there's supposed to be legal protections for people, defendants who attack you. So in the settlement negotiations, I asked the assistant California attorney if he would make a settlement term that those labs would go back to Blue Shield and get us put back in network. He refused to do it.
So, okay, you get your settlement, you get your proportion. There's a financial benefit there, but what about your business relationship? What about
we lost our business, and we lost a lot of money keeping it afloat until we could see this litigation through.
And then what incentive does that offer anyone else listening to this show that wants to be a whistleblower in the future and is presented with a similar circumstance like you were in years ago?
The last chapter in the book is rules for whistleblowers. And there are ways you can protect yourself. And I encourage anybody thinking of, getting involved, read Blood Money, and in particular that chapter. But understand the likelihood of success is less than the likelihood of getting hit by lightning.
I'm a half full type of guy. So if you're telling me you're more likely to get, and I live in Tampa, the lightning capital of the world. So you're more likely to get struck by lightning than you are to win one of these whistleblower lawsuits.
Right.
So then how do we change that? Because what you're doing is the right thing. You're on the right side of history. So how do we incentivize so that we can change that?
It all goes to the Department of Justice. They have to step up and do what Congress intended, form a partnership with whistleblowers and protect them. And put bad guys in jail so that the frauds just don't keep going. I was at a conference a few years ago with the top whistleblowers of the last 20 years. Not one of them did it for the money. They wanted to stop the illegal, greedy activity. And they all suffered as a result of it. One of them was an attempted murder. It was for a pharmaceutical manufacturing plant in Puerto Rico. She was in charge of quality assurance and discovered that faulty and contaminated drugs were being sold and injected into people. She reported it, and a few days later, as she was driving home, somebody deliberately forced her over a cliff. Yeah.
It sounds like, you remember in the 80s, Dallas?
Oh yeah, I love that show.
One of those like, plot twists. I see a car going off. And it just makes you think like corruption is one thing, but when you're talking about criminal aspects of like murder, crimes of violence and all these schemes, and, there has to be better protections afforded to whistleblowers in this.
Yeah, you're right. And she ended up winning a very large settlement though. So
she had to go off a cliff, though. I mean,
right, literally.
I don't want to go off a cliff and win a big settlement. I'd rather, as an attorney, you'd like to take that case to trial and have the odds stacked in your favor. At least you have a 50-50 shot of getting a verdict, not having to wait 3.5 years with 1 month left till you're going to possibly file bankruptcy, lose your business, be under a bridge, get forced off a cliff. I mean, this is pretty dramatic stuff.
Here's another ridiculous story. There was a fellow with a young family in Southern California who filed a claim. And when it became public, he couldn't find a job. He was blacklisted. So he was literally feeding his family ramen noodles. That's all he could afford. He comes home one night with his wife and his 2 young kids, and there's their dog nailed to the door and written in blood, "Stop." The dog's blood.
And I'm hoping someone got prosecuted for that.
No.
Is this a mob? It sounds like the Gambino family. Like, what are we talking about here?
Corporations will do anything to protect their profits.
To the level of that? I mean, yes. You think of a horse head, a dog? Like, come on.
Other people have reported that there are literally people across the street from their houses all day long watching them and going through their garbage.
And there's no prosecution on any of this?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Who do you think is your biggest ally in the government right now to help you with this stuff?
That would be Senator Grassley.
And what's his role? He's a senior senator. He's been there many years. He's got
He
authority.
was chairman of the Judiciary Committee until he was termed out, and then the Democrats won. He might have held a hearing, but he has no power now. But he's been a terrific ally to whistleblowers, and he's written several amendments to it that have been very effective.
When you look at everything you've been through personally to write your book, what was the greatest challenge? And I know you've been through a lot, but what do you consider the greatest challenge yourself that you personally had to like reach inside yourself and find that inner strength to get you above and beyond that particular setback or difficulty?
There was a point just before our settlement where we were in such financial distress that I was a basket case. And fortunately, my wife, who was the president of our laboratory, took over managing the money so that we could continue to pay our vendors and employees. I couldn't do it.
That had got to be really difficult for you when you see everything you're trying to do. Was there a moment where you were like, I just can't do this anymore?
No, there only that I couldn't manage those with without enough money. How do you keep the doors open? And she did that. I don't know how she did it. She's a remarkable woman. But other than that, I just fought through every challenge. And when I started this, there was no doubt in my mind we were going to succeed. And we did in California. And I thought, okay, it's going to be like this everywhere.
Nope.
Was I wrong?
Welcome to Florida.
Yeah. We had another one in Michigan. Their attorneys general spent years doing their investigation. If I said, we like it, we're going to intervene, we want to work with you. And so they went to a routine motion hearing, and the judge set a date 3 weeks later for trial, which
3 weeks,
everybody, just everybody. And so the defendant, Quest, immediately filed a summary judgment motion. And we thought, well, they have no chance of this. And we go to the hearing, and the judge says, this is the oldest case on my docket. If the attorney general can't get it to me in less than 5 years, it's not worth it. Bang, dismissed. Yeah.
and there's no ramifications for that, Judge.
No. Judges do what judges do. I have learned.
It could be couched. It could be couched under something like rules of order for the court. You know, like, oh, we're looking at judicial economy. We don't want these cases occupying the docket. If the prosecutors can't prosecute the case, then there's no case to be seen.
That's I think the opinion he took. But you know, you've dealt with judges, and one of the things I've learned, which I'm sure you know, is judges do what judges do.
Yeah, and you never comment.
It's very hard to predict. You think you've got a slam dunk motion, and they rule against you, and vice versa.
Isn't that the first lesson you learn as a lawyer? Is never comment on your judges, because you never know when you're going back in front of them again.
Yeah.
I want to ask you this. You've been through a lot. You got this great book that's out there. How would you suggest our audience approaches blood money when they get it? How do you want them to approach it?
I want them, well, a couple things. First of all, I tried to write it as a true legal thriller. And I hope they will enjoy the twists and the turns and the horrors that I uncovered and went through, and enjoy just as a thriller. Secondly, I want anybody who's considering being a whistleblower to understand what's in it and how they can best protect themselves.
When you look at what you've gone through, where are you going next? What do you see for yourself?
Well, I'm still doing it.
Yeah.
There's so much fraud in healthcare. As I said, we just filed a huge case 2 weeks ago. So I'm continuing to do it. I have to tell you, maybe I'm just unusual, but I enjoy the investigative challenge. You have to get a lot of evidence for these things.
Oh, of course.
And there's a chapter in there about how I had to learn to be a detective. And some very funny stories about it. And I enjoy that process.
How has COVID impacted your efforts with whistleblowing? I know, like, for me as a lawyer here in Florida, like, things get gummed up so slow down because of COVID. I understand that, but I'm wondering how it works in your cases. Because if you're telling me that there's a judge that dismisses a 5-year lawsuit saying it's been clogged up on the docket with lack of prosecution, then my question to that would be, well, will COVID exacerbate that and make it easier for them to dismiss cases that are old?
Well, they just allow them to delay it because the courts aren't in session. Some of the U.S. attorney's offices were closed. They did some work from home. So it just slows everything down. But I will say for DOJ, in their behalf, they are all over COVID fraud. That's an area very aggressive.
Okay, great. I'm happy they're prosecuting that. But what about this?
Yeah.
This is massive stuff, man. This has been around for a long time. It's like selectively prosecuting one thing because it's easy to do. But let's not do those harder things because that's let's just throw these little consent judgments at them.
Well, but there's so much fraud in COVID. There's all this money that was just thrown out, and these stories are amazing. And they are going after those guys, and they are putting some people in jail.
Well, I think all laws should be enforced equally under our system, and that if they're watchdogging and doing it aggressively on one, they should be doing it on, of course, the longer established one. It does
agree with you more.
It doesn't make sense. Why would you selectively prosecute something? Are you afraid of the Blood Brothers? Are you afraid that they're gonna,
Well, that's a good point, and one you've probably seen. The Department of Justice lawyers realize they're going up against the best lawyers in the country, and there's going to be an army of them for these big companies that they're fighting. Motion after motion after motion.
Oh yeah.
No, it's going to be a lot of work, and frankly, I think most of them are afraid to go to trial.
That's a shame because when you think about, that's a classic being papered, right? Being papered to death with motion practice as a lawyer. When you go against a larger entity and they stick a team of lawyers on you, I've experienced that, and you can't get shaken down by it. You got to just persevere like you do. But DOJ lawyers, they're part of they're supposed to be the best of the best. I mean, that's at least how I learned what DOJ is. They're supposed to be the best of the best. They're supposed to be the ones that have the ethical, guidelines and the moral compass to do what's right. Do they just become jaded when they're in the system for a while and they just get lazy and decide to become complacent?
I don't know. I can tell you there's one lawyer who was in a senior position in Main Justice in DC who ended up taking from the local U.S. attorneys 4 or 5 of our cases. She was so bad. It's just so bad. And she treated me like the bad guy.
Like, what's your favorite thing about being a whistleblower?
That I'm doing justice for taxpayers, and I'm trying to level the playing field so that we'll have a vibrant industry as opposed to an industry that two laboratories dominate. And in the book Blood Money, you'll read about these companies make a lot of very serious mistakes that in some cases cost patient lives.
Well, I would think that if you had an extra set of books, that'd be a red flag, right?
You would think so.
You would think that in reality, that would be something that would require follow-up and further investigation.
How Rick Scott didn't go to jail, I will never understand.
I mean, I understand. I think you can understand why. We don't want to admit it because for us, it goes to the core of, it goes against the core of what I believe our system should be based on, which is all the positive aspects of our system. And so when you deal with corruption, you've got to figure out how to root it out and do it effectively where it doesn't contaminate everything around it.
And you know how to do that?
No.
Put people in jail.
Yeah, exactly.
If you do just that, make it not pay, it'll stop.
Your title fits it so perfectly. I love it. Blood Money. It's like you couldn't be more. How do I say this? Your words have more value with that title than anything else I could think of, based on the corruption, the deceit, the violence, the sheer lack of integrity on every level possible, as well as just outright stupidity, in my opinion. It gets to the point where it rises to the level of stupidity.
I can't get over the lack of integrity. And there isn't any. for a lot of companies in the laboratory industry and in healthcare in general. I mean, I've expanded now beyond clinical laboratories to some other types of healthcare companies.
You know, the only other title I could come up with is Bloodsuckers, but I like Blood Money better. I like Blood Money a lot better because it gets to the heart of the issue, which is financial. If you're doing this kind of crime, there are victims, and it's called the taxpayers, and those are the people that need to be made whole.
Yeah.
Looking at your background and everything that you've done, do you think you see state governments changing their position in the future if the federal government follows suit and starts enacting reforms that have teeth and actually prosecuting these offenses?
That's a good question. Maybe. There are some good state attorney general offices. We had the great fortune to work with California and Florida, and they were terrific. We also had the misfortune of working with some others.
Mm-hmm.
But one assistant attorney general torpedoed her own case. Can you believe that?
I can't. Hearing these things, it just doesn't make sense to me. I have to hold my head for a second because it gives me a headache. It makes me think, are we really in 2021? And is this the United States or is this some banana republic where you have
her own case? And then when they decided not to intervene, we were prosecuting it and we got a minor amount of money. And she demanded that the state get all the money. We go, that's not what the law says. And she went to a judge, and the judge ruled against her, and she went to eventually the state Supreme Court, and the judges just eviscerated her.
Unbelievable. I saw that there's a quote from from Vice President Kamala Harris at the top of your book. Is that for this book, or is that a quote that you got that you tied it into it? I'm very curious.
No, that's a direct quote when the settlement in California was announced. She was the attorney general then. She authorized the settlement.
You have a direct contact, which is really cool. And I know her quote says, this historic settlement affirms that MedCal exists to help the state's neediest families rather than the illicitly private companies that commit the crimes. I'm doing it in essence. I'm just quoting, but ad-libbing a little of that. That's a strong quote, though. That's telling me that she's affirming.
It was about that settlement.
She's affirming that. And what about the Biden administration overall? Have you had any efforts on their part to comment on your particular work and what you've seen?
My experience is the Department of Justice is so insane that no administration has been able to have any effect on the way in which they handle whistleblower cases.
Yeah, but
for example, President Obama in Obamacare partly financed it by saying we're going to go after and get 500 billion or something in fraud, and we're going to use that to offset the cost of Obamacare. There was no change.
We're running low on time, and I want to ask you, how can our audience reach you?
Go to my website, chrisriedelauthor.com, and all my contact information is there. If anybody's thinking of becoming a whistleblower, I'm more than happy to talk to you and give you at least my best advice.
I sit at a unique place because I'm an attorney and I do my podcasting and I love my show and I really enjoy these opportunities. And one of the things I could tell you is I could see you doing like a whistleblower boot camp where you could create some type of a program to help people who are whistleblowers or perceived whistleblowers understand their role and what they need to do with their protections and how they should act, steps they should take to document, whatever that is. I don't think there's anything that exists out there like that. But I could tell you that if you were one to put that together, it would be probably very successful based on the fact of your experience.
I may be giving you a call to talk about this.
I want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing this extremely important, vital issue, because for me, it goes to the heart of spirituality and law and the interplay of justice and truth and morals and ethics. And that's why I think you're so important to align with my show, because I want our audience to think critically on this issue. I want anyone who sees your book to pick it up, to read it, to learn from it, and to enact the changes we need from your chapters regarding whistleblowers, protecting whistleblowers, and prosecuting the corrupt entities that take advantage of them.
Thank you, Jason. I want to mention that the book is an Amazon bestseller, and the response of people who've read it that I don't know who contacted me has been very positive. They really loved the story. And like you, they're like, ah, this goes on.
Well, what I told you, I get your information from your publicist, Jackie Lapkin and Missy Hatfield. I love them and they're great. And when I saw your book, normally I get spiritual books, and I saw your book and I was like, wow, this is exactly what I want right now. I was excited. I saw, they send you the blurb about what to expect to have you on the show. And I read it in the middle of the night and I was so excited. I couldn't fall asleep. I was like, I'm going to have this awesome story on my show that deals with the waste and the fraud and neglect and protections afforded under our system and the challenges to that. It's real life. You couldn't get more real than this and more authentic. And that's why I thank you for sharing your information on our platform.
Thank you, Jason. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
I just want to thank Chris Riedel for coming on the show today. And his book, Blood Money, is out. Check it out. I'm going to have the information in the show notes. You can't get to the heart of an issue more important than this particular issue. And it's dear to me because healthcare is something that is so important in our society that when people take advantage of it from the inside, medical lab companies are the inside. They're trusted. They're given a significant amount of their own self-autonomy. And when they make decisions that are affecting us all, they need to be policed better. They need to be prosecuted. They need to be brought up, and transparency needs to be enacted. There's a lot. When you deal with whistleblowing, from our conversation today, I feel like the current system in place is more like dog whistleblowing. You can blow it, but no one hears it because the system itself is ignoring why whistleblowing exists, why the Keaton statute exists, why you have someone like Chris making this fight as the David against the Goliath of the industry. You've got to look at these things in context and think to yourself, why is it the way it is? Why are there corrupt entities taking advantage for the government resources and just taking advantage of taxpayer dollars? And I'd say the simple answer is because they can, because there hasn't been anything enacted to put with teeth to prosecute and call out when there's offenses committed. That's what I get from my take on this. The blood brothers need to be held to be accountable. So next time you have your blood drawn and you're at a lab, think to yourself, is this company acting ethically and morally, or are they corrupt and taking advantage of the system? Pick up Blood Money, check it out. I'm so grateful to have Chris on the show. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. If anyone has any questions, you could reach out to me directly at info@D, socialpsychicradio.com. Until next time, stay positive, because when you're positive, anything's possible. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Social Psychic Radio Show. Don't forget to join us for another episode next time. If you enjoyed the show, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a review on iTunes. You can also check us out on Facebook, and don't forget to visit the Social Psychic YouTube channel. Until next time, it's a big world out there. Keep an open mind, embrace your paradigms, and know that the universe is always yours to explore.